I was an old woman when I finally found the courage to speak of it. The years had bent my back. The silence of cloisters had shaped my soul. But the memory still burned with a clarity that time could not erase. When I close my eyes, I am no longer in this small stone room where I spend my days in prayer. I am 19 again, standing in the echoing halls of the convent school in San Francisco, where my life first trembled beneath the weight of a secret I dared not share. The convent smelled always of wax and incense. The chapel's candles flickered against high stained glass windows, painting fractured light upon our bowed heads. We spoke little, for silence was our offering to God. I remember my hands, raw from scrubbing wooden floors, clasped tight around a rosary until the beads left marks upon my skin. I thought that pain was holy. I thought discipline was love. How could I have known that another kind of love was waiting to find me, even there? Every morning the bells tolled before dawn, their sound cutting through the cold. We rose from narrow cots, draped in plain habits, our eyes heavy with sleep, but our spirits pressed toward obedience. I believed then that I had chosen this life freely. But had I? Or had I only been running from the world, from the loneliness of my childhood? When I look back now, I wonder if God was calling me, or if I mistook my fear for his voice. That year, a new priest came to guide our lessons. Father Michael was his name. His voice carried easily in the vaulted chapel, calm yet strong, like a river flowing between stones. He spoke not only of scripture, but of mercy, of compassion, of the frailty of human hearts. I remember how the sisters whispered of his youth, his quiet smile, his devotion. I told myself I did not notice such things, but I did. My heart noticed before I could silence it. One evening, after Vespers, I lingered in the chapel longer than I should have. The candles were nearly burned out, the shadows stretching like black veils across the pews. I thought I was alone until I heard footsteps. Father Michael was there, extinguishing the last flames. His eyes met mine, and in that single glance, something shifted inside me. He nodded politely, yet there was a weight in the air I could not explain. Why did my chest tighten? Why did I suddenly wish to speak, though the rules demanded silence? The weeks that followed were uneventful on the surface. Lessons continued. Prayers filled the hours. The convent life moved like clockwork. But beneath the routine, I felt a new awareness stirring. I caught myself listening for his footsteps, watching for his figure in the courtyard. When he spoke, I lingered on each word, as if it were meant for me alone. Was it sin already to notice? Or was it simply the beating of a heart that refused to be silent? I confess, at times I prayed longer in the chapel, not for God's voice, but to hear his. I whispered the Psalms, while my thoughts wandered far from the altar. How dangerous is a thought, I asked myself, when it lives only in silence. And yet even then, I sense that thoughts have a way of becoming flesh, of stepping out into the light, no matter how fiercely we guard them. Now, as I sit here in the twilight of my years, I can see it clearly. That night in the chapel, when his eyes found mine, was the beginning of everything. The first tremor that cracked the stone walls of obedience I had built around myself. I did not know it yet, but a forbidden path had opened before me, one I would not be able to turn away from. And that path began to reveal itself the very next evening, when he spoke my name aloud for the first time. He said my name as if he were setting it gently on the altar. "Sister Anna," he murmured, and the sound startled me more than the tolling bell. I had not known my own name could carry such warmth within the stone-cold hush of the chapel. I lowered my gaze out of habit, but I felt his presence as surely as the candle's last heat on my fingertips. He asked if I would help carry the hymnals to the sacristy, an innocent request, fitting for any obedient sister, and I nodded before my caution could answer for me. We walked side by side through the narrow corridor, where old stones kept a chill even in summer. I remember the gritty scent of dust and lemon oil rising from the wooden benches, the distant clatter of dishes from the refectory, the bell's faint residual hum trembling the air. When a door creaked, I stopped, heart tight, expecting reprimand from the shadows. But there was only silence, and our footsteps resumed, careful and modest. How easy it is to call a thing harmless when it is still small enough to hide in the hem of your habit. We stacked the hymnals in neat rows. It was simple work, the kind that made the hours pass like beads sliding along a cord. Father Michael thanked me and asked if I had found his homily on mercy useful. I said yes, but the word felt thin, like a veil over a window in a storm. Mercy had always meant rules softened by love. That day it meant something breaking open inside me, a place where rule and love did not fit together. Could a soul hold both without tearing? After Compline, I returned to my cell with the rest, our steps synchronized by years of practice. The corridor smelled of old wool and beeswax, and the lamp's reflected flame wavered like a secret on the verge of speech. I kneeled by my narrow bed and tried to pray, but the words rose and fell like birds that refused to land. I asked God to still my heart. Instead, I heard a question in my silence. Was I praying for peace or for forgetfulness? The next afternoon I was assigned to the school's library, a room of quiet lamplight and the faint, beloved dust of old pages. Children's voices drifted in from the courtyard, bright as birdsong, before the sister librarian closed the windows and sealed the hush. Father Michael came in searching for a volume of Augustine, a copy with worn leather like an old glove. Our hands reached for the same shelf. We drew back, and he smiled with polite restraint, the smile of a man who knows a boundary and also knows the cost of touching it. He thanked me for the help with the hymnals. I thanked him for his sermon. It might have ended there, but the library invited questions the chapel did not. He asked if I enjoyed the Psalms. I said I did, especially the ones that sounded like a man negotiating with God in the dark. He laughed softly, then checked himself, as if laughter were too bright a color for those gray stone walls. He said, "Sometimes the heart speaks in psalm before the mouth dares." I said nothing, but my pulse answered. In the weeks that followed, we exchanged few words, always about books or timetables, or the children's lessons. Yet the space around those words grew charged, like the pause before the bell strikes. I realized that my obedience had long been a comfortable garment, tailored to fit me without rubbing. Now a seam began to tug. If God fashioned the human heart, why would he give it rooms that must never be entered? And if he did, what was I to do with the key I suddenly found in my hand? Mother Cecilia, our superior, noticed only that I rose earlier and stayed longer at chores. She praised my diligence. I accepted it with a bowed head and a vein of shame I did not know how to confess. I polished brass candlesticks until I could see my face in them, thin, frightened, and not entirely ready to be good. When Father Michael preached, I took notes no one had assigned. When I scrubbed floors, I scrubbed the same patch twice, as if I could scour my chest clean with lye and bristle. How many surfaces must shine before the soul reflects only God? One fog-damp morning, he asked if I would help carry boxes of donated books up the stone steps to the school. My first answer was the one I had given the world since childhood. Yes. Then a second answer rose, the one that trembled. Be careful. We climbed in measured silence, the boxes steady in our arms. At the landing, my footing slipped. He set his box down and reached for mine, steadying it, steadying me. The contact was brief. Nothing at all. And everything. I pulled my hand back as if from a flame, and he did the same. Almost fearful, almost reverent. The stairwell held that charged quiet in which a word could tip the world. He lowered his eyes first. "Forgive me," he said. "It is cold today, and I feared you might fall." I wanted to say there are other edges here, more dangerous than stone, but I only nodded and moved on, the box suddenly weightless and impossibly heavy. That night the wind rose, rattling the chapel windows like a skeletal hand. In the candlelight, the Stations of the Cross looked almost alive, the carved faces grief-polished by generations of fingers. I tried to surrender my will again, the way novitiates practice surrender, until it becomes muscle memory. But my will did not feel like an enemy. It felt like a child abandoned at the gate, waiting to be let in. Was that my sin? That I could not cast out the child and call it holiness? He began to avoid me, or tried to, as if he had sensed the same seam, loosening, and wanted to stitch it shut before it widened. I, too, tried to choose the right corridors, the safer pews, the tasks that kept me in groups. Yet the convent is a closed world. Circles intersect whether you draw them carefully or not. One Tuesday after the noon bell, I opened the sacristy door and found him alone, head bent, arranging cruets with a focus that looked like penance. He did not look up. I stood there, feeling like an intruder in my own life. I whispered that I could come back. He said without raising his eyes, "No, sister. Please, stay." The word please in that room felt like a living thing. I asked if he needed help. He hesitated, then stepped aside, and I passed near enough to smell the clean starch of his cassock. We worked in small motions, setting out linen, weighing silence, placing the sacred within reach. When we finished, he exhaled as if he had been holding his breath through an entire mass. "Thank you," he said. "You make holy work look light." I almost answered, "You make light look holy." But I bit the words until they bled in my mouth. The fault line widened in the ordinary way that great tremors do, with tiny shifts on a quiet day. I paused longer at the gate to the garden. He turned down a corridor when he heard my steps. I prayed not to see him, and feared the prayer would be granted. If anyone had asked, I could have named a dozen small reasons for my distraction. Fatigue, hunger, the children's noise, the city fog pressing its gray forehead to our windows. But the truth was a seed cracking underground, and I could hear it. In confession, I spoke only in abstractions. Distraction, pride, impatience. The priest behind the screen asked if I entertained thoughts against my vows. I said no, because I did not know what to call a thought that did not feel like rebellion, but like a summons. He gave absolution, and I received it with gratitude and a grief that had nowhere to kneel. It is a strange thing to be forgiven for a sin you have not yet decided to commit. One evening the children's choir rehearsed late for a feast day, their small voices rising like larks into the vaulted dusk. I lingered at the back, unneeded but unable to leave, while Father Michael stood near the organist and followed the score. When the final amen faded, the sisters gathered the children, pressing scarves into small hands, shepherding them toward the dormitories. I felt the room empty around me, the chapel returning to its native stillness. He turned, saw me, and for a moment his face was unguarded, equal parts joy and fear, the human mixture. "Good night, Sister Anna," he said, almost formal again. I answered in kind, stepped aside, and let him pass. My heart beat loudly in the hush as if trying to call him back. The last candle sputtered and went out, and darkness reached gently across the pews, like the hand of a friend. I stood there, finally ready to choose something. Duty, desire, or at least truth, when a soft footfall stirred the air behind me, and a voice I knew too well said my name. When I turned, Mother Cecilia stood in the doorway, her veil a black outline against the faint glow of the corridor lamp. Her eyes, sharp as candle flames, studied me with a silence heavier than words. "It is late, Sister Anna," she said at last, her voice low and steady. "Why are you still here when the others are at rest?" My throat closed around any excuse. I whispered something about prayer, about losing track of time, but the lie tasted like ash even before it left my lips. She watched me for a long breath, then nodded slowly. "Be vigilant, child. The heart is deceitful, even in holy places." She turned and disappeared into the corridor, her steps echoing like a warning bell. That night I lay in my cell, staring at the rough plaster ceiling. Every sound was magnified, the wind rattling the shutters, a sister coughing in the next room, the creak of wood as someone shifted in sleep. But beneath those noises was the sound I feared most, my own heartbeat, quickened by shame, and by something I dared not name. Was it already sin to feel seen? Or was it only the shadow of temptation, still unfulfilled, still waiting at the threshold? The next day, Mother Cecilia assigned me to laundry duty. I knew it was no coincidence. Scrubbing cassocks and habits in the stone-walled washroom was a labor meant to humble and cleanse. The cold water stung my hands red, and the soap burned the cracks in my skin. As I worked, I thought of her eyes the night before. Did she suspect more than a tardy prayer? Or did she simply sense the tremor in me that I could no longer still? It is strange how authority can feel like God's own gaze, making every hidden thought tremble in the light. At Vespers, I kept my eyes fixed on the Psalter, though I could feel Father Michael's presence across the chapel, like a weight upon my shoulders. His voice rose with the chant, steady and untroubled, while mine faltered on the notes. I wanted to believe he was untouched, that the moment on the stairwell had not left its mark, but when his eyes flicked briefly, unwillingly, toward me, I knew the truth. Two souls cannot tremble in the same rhythm without knowing it. Days passed with the tension of a string drawn too tight. Each ordinary duty carried the risk of collision. The refectory, the library, the garden. We did not seek each other, and yet we crossed paths more than chance would permit. A hand brushing past a stack of books, a voice lowered in a question about schedules. The faintest glance held 1 second too long. Each became a fragment of a language we were learning in secret. Was it love growing in silence, or only the hunger of what was forbidden? I began to fast more often, as if an empty body might cleanse a full heart. I walked the cloister with a rosary clutched so tightly that the beads left bruises. I begged God for clarity. If this stirring was evil, why did it feel so alive? And if it was love, why was it cloaked in shame? Was I being tested, or was I already failing? Sometimes, in the candlelit hush, I thought I heard his voice. Other times, I feared it was only the echo of my own longing. Mother Cecilia watched me closely. Her presence grew like a shadow at my shoulder. She spoke kindly, but her words carried weight. "Guard your spirit, Anna. The enemy is subtle. He enters not with fire, but with whispers." I nodded, obedient on the surface, but inside, I was shaken. Did she see into my heart? Or was she only reminding every sister of the danger that waits at the edges of devotion? I could not tell. Fear and guilt walked with me as constant companions. Then came the evening in the courtyard, when the fog hung low over the stone arches, and the lamps glowed like dim stars. I carried a basket of linens back from the wash, my hands raw and stinging. Father Michael crossed the path ahead, pausing to let me pass. For a moment, we stood within the same circle of lamplight. He looked at me, and in that look was no pretense, no disguise, only the truth we both had tried to silence. "Sister Anna," he whispered, barely audible. "Be careful." And then he was gone, his footsteps swallowed by the fog. I stood there trembling, the basket heavy in my arms, my heart heavier still. What did he mean? Be careful of the Mother Superior's suspicion? Be careful of the walls that were closing in? Or be careful of him, of us? The words lingered like incense after the flame is gone, filling the air long after he had left. And in that moment, I knew something was coming. Something neither prayer nor obedience could prevent. The next day, the first true crack appeared. The crack came quietly, not with thunder, but with the softest sound, a door closing behind us in the library. I had gone there to return a stack of hymnals, their leather bindings worn smooth from countless hands. The room was dim, afternoon light slanting through high windows, dust motes drifting like tiny spirits in the air. I thought myself alone until I heard the faint shuffle of footsteps. Father Michael emerged from between the shelves, carrying a volume of Augustine. Our eyes met, and neither of us looked away. I should have spoken of the books, of lessons, of anything safe. Instead, silence stretched, fragile and trembling. He set the volume down and said softly, "I never meant to trouble you." My voice caught as I replied, "You haven't troubled me." The truth in my words startled me as much as it seemed to startle him. For a moment we stood in that fragile space where honesty is both a blessing and a danger. Was it God's grace that guided us there? Or was it temptation leading us astray? The bell rang for evening prayers, its chime carrying through stone walls. We both turned, startled, as though caught in an act, though nothing had been done. He moved toward the door, then paused. "We must be cautious," he whispered. "Our vows are more than words." His eyes lingered on mine one heartbeat too long before he left. I remained frozen, my hands pressed against the wooden table, trembling as though I had touched fire. The echo of his voice wrapped around me like a secret cloak I could not shed. That night the convent felt different, as if every shadow held a question. I joined the sisters in the chapel, chanting psalms in voices that rose and fell like waves. But my heart was elsewhere, torn between devotion and desire. I wondered, if love is from God, why should it be feared? If mercy is his greatest gift, why would he deny it here, where two hearts found each other in silence? Was my longing rebellion, or was it only another form of prayer? Mother Cecilia's gaze grew sharper. She lingered near me during meals, her silence a scrutiny more piercing than words. At times I imagined she could hear my heart beating too loudly, betraying me beneath my habit. She reminded us daily of our vows: poverty, chastity, obedience. "These are not chains," she said, "but wings. Without them you fall." Her words sank into me like cold iron. Yet part of me whispered, what if flight means something different than she believes? The children at the convent school were preparing for a spring recital. Their laughter filled the courtyard, a music more honest than any hymn. One afternoon, while supervising them, I felt his presence before I saw him. Father Michael stood across the yard, watching the children with a gentle smile. A little boy tugged his sleeve, and he bent down, listening intently, his patience a kind of holiness. I could not look away. When he glanced up, his eyes met mine across the courtyard, and in that instant the world narrowed to the space between us. It was not sin I saw there, but recognition. Later, as I tended this garden alone, he approached. The roses had begun to bud, their thorns sharp with new life. He picked up a fallen rake, set it against the wall, and said, "You shouldn't be out here alone." I told him solitude was my companion. He looked at me quietly before answering. "Even solitude can betray you." His words left me unsettled. Was he speaking of himself? Of us? The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the caw of a crow overhead. He left quickly, but the echo of his presence clung to the garden like perfume. That evening, I confessed to God with trembling lips. I spoke of distraction, of weakness, of shadows in my heart. Yet I could not bring myself to name the truth aloud. The confessional's wooden screen hid my tears, but not from him. Did God weep with me? Or did he turn his face away? I did not know. I only knew that silence had become a burden heavier than any vow. In the refectory, whispers began to stir. Sisters noticed my restlessness, the way my eyes drifted during prayer. One asked if I was ill. Another suggested I was too strict in my fasting. Their voices were kind, but suspicion laced the air like smoke. I laughed softly, deflecting their concern, but inside, I felt the walls tightening. How long before whispers grew into questions? How long before questions became accusations? The night of the recital arrived. Children's voices soared beneath vaulted ceilings, pure and untainted. I stood with the sisters, hands folded, trying to focus on their angelic song. Yet I felt his gaze somewhere in the crowd, as undeniable as breath. When the final hymn ended, applause echoed through the hall. The children beamed, the sisters smiled, and still my eyes searched. At the edge of the assembly, Father Michael looked at me, only for a moment, but long enough to kindle both hope and dread. When the hall emptied, I lingered, gathering scattered sheets of music. He entered, alone, his expression unreadable. We stood in silence, the candles flickering low. At last he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Anna, this cannot continue." The sound of my name, unadorned by title, pierced me more deeply than any rebuke. I tried to answer, but my lips failed. My heart beat with a truth I could not deny. I had crossed an invisible line, and there was no way back. And it was in that very moment, as the shadows pressed close around us, that the door creaked open, and Mother Cecilia stepped inside. Mother Cecilia's shadow filled the doorway like a verdict. She did not shout. She never raised her voice in anger. Instead, she folded her hands as if in prayer and looked at us with an exhausted clarity I had never seen before. "Sister Anna," she said slowly, each syllable measured. "What is happening here?" The simplicity of the question was a blade. It cut through the fragile pretenses and laid the trembling truth bare on the library table between us. Father Michael bowed his head as if to pray, though his hands were empty. "Nothing unbecoming, Superior," he said, and the words sounded small in that great room of books. I felt the air leave the space around me. How could he name it nothing, when it had already been everything to me? I swallowed and tried to form an answer that would both protect him and spare myself. Nothing fit. What language keeps a sin from becoming a scandal, or a scandal from becoming a sentence? Mother Cecilia lingered a long time, her eyes moving from his cassock to my habit, as if reading a ledger of accounts. "We are custodians of souls," she murmured, not reproachful but mournful. "Vows are entrusted to us, and to break them is to break trust." I wanted to tell her that my heart had been broken before vows had ever found me, that the convent had sewn itself to that brokenness and made me whole in ways I could not name. Instead, I stood mute, feeling my youth and my choices both unravel. She asked Father Michael to step into the corridor with her, and I watched them go, shrinking into the dim light as though they were headed toward judgment. I waited so long that the dust motes settled into new patterns, and the afternoon light shifted into a colder tone. When they returned, Mother Cecilia's face had a firmness I recognized as final. "You will both report to me after Compline," she said. "There will be no rumors in this house. There will be truth, and there will be penance." Her decision hung between us like the crucifix above the altar. Inevitable, demanding. That night I knelt at my bedside and tried to shape confession into words I could bear. In the dark, the rosary in my hands was heavier than stone. I asked God whether obedience was always wisdom, whether the vows I had taken at 19 were mine still, or had become a garment given and refitted by years. Did God punish a heart for recognizing another heart? Or did he ask us simply to carry love differently, to sanctify it through sacrifice? How could I know which was the truth when both seemed to call in the same voice? Compline was a brittle thing that evening. The sisters moved like a single breathing being, voices low, eyes downcast. I tried to fix myself to the words, but my mind kept tracing the curve of Mother Cecilia's mouth when she spoke to Father Michael, the small concession she allowed him as a man who had taken vows himself. After the service, we went to the small parlor, where she received confessions of a different sort. Disciplinary ones, questions heavy with the life of order. In the pale light, Father Michael and I sat opposite Mother Cecilia. She listened first to him, then to me. He spoke of pastoral difficulties, of growing attachments that could complicate a ministry. His voice was steady, but threaded with sorrow. When it was my turn, I felt as if I were laying out the entrails of my life on a table for the surgeon's review. I told her of the ache that had lived within me for years, of the way his kindness had taught my heart to speak. I did not speak of curses or sins, so much as of a human ache that had found its answer where it should never have been sought. Mother Cecilia did not cast us as villains. She did not thunder condemnation. She spoke of responsibility, of the safety of the sisters, of the young women who looked to us, for example. "There are consequences beyond our own souls," she said. "To step outside the walls is to risk many." Her words were not empty threats. They were the sober accounting of one who had watched vows unravel and communities fracture. What was the life of two against the ruin their weakness might cause to others? I was offered choices that night with the dryness of ledger lines, penance and continued service under close supervision, reassignment for Father Michael to another parish, or for me, the possibility of leaving, returning to the world beyond the gate as a laywoman, if I chose. Leave. The word trembled in my mouth like a bell I had forgotten I knew how to ring. To leave would be to abandon the cradle that had sheltered my faith, the very place that had taught me to pray. And yet, to stay would be to clothe a kind of death in holy habit every morning and call it devotion. Which was the truer betrayal of God, to deny the human heart or to deny the fullest shape of love? We were told to sleep on it, to bring our decisions at dawn. The convent that night was a city of restless souls. I lay awake and recalled the contour of his voice, the way he had once steadied my hands on the stair. I thought of the children singing in the school, of the way Father Michael laughed when a small voice mispronounced a hymn. I thought of Mother Cecilia's face and the weight of her years. Could I walk away from the place where my prayers had roots? Could he, a shepherd by calling, abandon his flock to chase a private tenderness? If we left, what would become of the lives we touched here? At 2 a.m, I rose and went to the chapel. The moon cut silver across the nave, and in that light, the wooden stations looked softer, as if even their suffering might be softened by the night. I lit a candle. Though I knew the lamps would be lit by morning, the act was private, a small rebellion of light. I spoke aloud for the first time in months, not the rehearsed phrases of devotion, but a question pressed from the center of my being. If love is meant to sanctify, not to destroy, how then shall I sanctify mine? I asked the empty nave. Who answers such a question but the heart itself? When I returned to my cell, he was there. He had come without sound, as if the night were his cloak. He sat on the edge of my bed like a penitent, and placed his rough hands in his lap. "Anna," he said simply, and the world narrowed to that one name. I did not tell him of Mother Cecilia's offer. I did not confess how my mind had turned the two options like a coin in a palm. Instead, I took his hands and let them hold me, the way I had been held by faith and habit for so long. We spoke then of small things. We did not promise. Promises in a place like ours were made sharp by others' needs. But when dawn came, soft and gray, I found my feet already moving. I had chosen. I could not say that I had chosen the better path, only that I had chosen the true one for that moment, and that truth was a heavy compass. I packed nothing but the small things a woman might need to cross a city: a shawl, a prayer book, the rosary that had been with me since my novitiate. I left the worn habit folded on my bed, like a thing I had outgrown. As I reached the gate at the eastern wall, the bell began to toll for morning. Its sound wrapped the world in warning or benediction. I could not tell which. I pushed the gate open and stepped into the fog, and there, in the dim light, I saw him, waiting. We moved quickly toward the street, hearts hammering against the ribs of the city waking. The chapel bell tolled again, a deep sonorous cry that rolled away across the roofs. As I gripped his arm, I felt the steadiness of his hand and the tremor in my own. We had crossed a line from which there could be no return. The convent stones receded behind us like an altar we had left burning. And then, before we could reach the first turning into the lane that would take us away from everything we had known, a low voice called from the mist my name. The sound of my name froze me where I stood. It was not Father Michael's voice. It was Mother Cecilia's, steady and unshaken, though softened by the fog. I turned, heart pounding like a guilty drum, and saw her figure approach through the pale mist, her veil trailing, her hands folded calmly before her. She did not shout, did not accuse. She simply looked at us with eyes that seemed to carry both sorrow and inevitability. "Sister Anna," she said, Do you know what you are doing?" The question landed heavier than a curse. I could not answer. My lips moved, but no words came. Father Michael stepped slightly forward, his shoulders squared as though to shield me. "Mother," he began, his voice trembling but resolute. "We seek only to follow the truth of our hearts." She raised one hand gently, not to silence him, but to steady the trembling air between us. "Your hearts," she replied, "were consecrated to God. To take them back now, do you believe it will end in peace?" Her words cut deeper than any threat of punishment, for she spoke not as a superior, but as a mother who had seen such choices before. The city stirred beyond the convent walls. A trolley bell clanged faintly, footsteps echoed from the early workers, the world indifferent to the storm inside us. I looked at the gate, half open behind me, then at the worn stones under my feet, then at Father Michael, whose eyes pleaded for strength I did not yet possess. Was freedom just a street away, or was it an exile that would hollow me? Was God calling me back through Mother Cecilia's voice, or was it fear wearing the mask of obedience? She stepped closer, and in the dim light her face appeared older than I had ever noticed, lines carved deep from years of prayer and vigilance. "Anna," she said softly, "I was 19 once too. Do not think your struggle is unknown to me. The vows demand sacrifice, yes, but do not mistake sacrifice for despair." Her words carried the ache of someone who had made choices and buried them in silence. For a moment, I wondered what her own story held, what fires she had extinguished in the name of faith. Father Michael's hand brushed against mine, subtle but unmistakable. That simple contact made my heart leap and ache in the same instant. "We cannot live a lie," he said, his voice low but firm. Mother Cecilia's gaze did not waver. "And yet, if you leave now, your truth will become the lie others must explain. The sisters will whisper, the children will question, the faithful will stumble. Can you carry the weight of all those souls?" Her words pressed upon me like the stone arches of the chapel itself, heavy, immovable. I wanted to cry out that love was not a lie, that God himself was love, and how could he deny his own essence? But I also wanted to fall to my knees and beg for the simplicity of obedience again, for the safety of walls that told me who I was and what I must do. Was I weak to hesitate? Or was hesitation the last sign of conscience I had left? My silence stretched, a rope fraying between two anchors. Finally, Mother Cecilia stepped aside, her hand resting on the gate's iron bar. "The choice is yours," she said. "But remember, once the gate closes behind you, it will not open again." Her voice did not threaten, it mourned. She turned her face slightly toward Father Michael. "And you, Father, your parish will not forgive lightly. You know this." He lowered his head, as though already burdened by the judgment that awaited. The fog thickened, swallowing the walls, blurring the boundary between convent and city. I felt as if I were standing on the edge of two worlds, one of discipline and sacrifice, the other of love and uncertainty. My fingers still touched his, but lightly, as if one breeze could tear us apart. Mother Cecilia's eyes rested on me, not unkind, but unrelenting. "Choose," she whispered. I drew breath to speak, my chest tight with the weight of decision. Father Michael's grip tightened, urging me forward. Behind me, the convent bell began to toll, slow and solemn, as if heaven itself demanded an answer. And in that tolling silence, I opened my mouth. When suddenly a figure appeared through the fog, behind Mother Cecilia, calling out with urgency, carrying news that would change everything. The figure moved quickly through the fog, sandals slapping against the cobblestones. It was Brother Thomas, the young novice often sent on errands between the convent and parish. His face was pale, his breath ragged as he reached us. "Mother Cecilia," he gasped, bending low. "There has been an accident at the parish. A fire has broken out in the sacristy. They are calling for Father Michael." For a moment, time fractured. The fog, the tolling bell, the ache in my chest, all of it collapsed into that one word: fire. Father Michael straightened as though the summons had struck his sign. Duty leapt before desire, and I saw in his eyes the weight of his vows reclaiming him. He stepped away from me, his hand slipping from mine like water through cupped palms. "I must go," he whispered, and in those 3 words lived both an ending and a promise unfulfilled. Mother Cecilia's face did not change, though I thought I saw the shadow of relief in her eyes. She turned to me only once, quietly. "Anna, you see now, God has answered for you." I wanted to cry out, to insist that God had not answered at all, that chance or fate or cruel providence had stolen my choice before I could make it. But my lips would not move. Perhaps some part of me knew she was right, that our lives were bound not by our desires, but by the hands of a providence we could neither shape nor escape. Father Michael placed a hand briefly on my shoulder, his touch fleeting, reverent. "Pray for me," he said. I nodded, unable to speak. Then he vanished into the fog with Brother Thomas, their figures swallowed by urgency. I was left standing at the gate, half in the world and half within the walls, the iron cold beneath my fingers. My shawl slipped from my shoulders, and I let it fall, as though some invisible hand had stripped me of choice along with warmth. Mother Cecilia did not scold me. She only gathered the shawl, folded it carefully, and placed it back into my arms. "Come, child," she said gently. "This night has asked more of you than you can bear. Return to your cell. Tomorrow we will speak of penance." Her voice was softer now, almost maternal, but no less firm. I followed her back through the stone corridors, each step heavy, echoing like the slow beat of a funeral drum. That night I lay awake, hearing distant shouts carried on the wind from the parish. I imagined flames licking sacred wood, smoke curling through the rafters, Father Michael's silhouette moving amid chaos. I prayed with words that fell apart in my mouth, not for forgiveness, not for obedience, but for his safety. Was that still sin? To pray not for God's will but for one man's breath? Or was it the truest prayers I had ever spoken? When dawn broke, the news came swiftly. The fire had been contained, but the sacristy was ruined, its sacred vessels blackened, its walls charred. Father Michael had worked tirelessly through the night, carrying water, guiding others, risking his life. He was hailed as a hero. Whispers spread through the convent of his bravery, of God's hand upon him. I listened in silence, my heart torn between pride and grief. He had been called away not by sin, but by fire. And yet, as I knelt in the chapel that morning, I felt something else stirring beneath the ashes of my heart. The gate was still behind me. The world was still beyond it. Though I had been pulled back, the longing had not died. If anything, it burned brighter, more dangerous, more consuming. I pressed my forehead to the cool wood of the pew and asked myself, how many times can a soul be pulled back from the edge before it finally leaps? The chapel fell silent as the sisters filed out. leaving me alone in the dim light. The air smelled faintly of smoke drifting. Even here, mingling with incense, I lifted my head, and in that silence, I heard it again. Not the crackle of fire, not the toll of bells, but my name, spoken softly, almost trembling, from the shadowed doorway. It was him. He stood in the doorway, his cassock smudged with soot, his face pale with exhaustion. His eyes met mine, and for a moment neither of us moved. The chapel was empty save for the faint smoke clinging to his garments, and the quiet echo of my own heartbeat. "Anna," he whispered, his voice breaking the silence. "I had to see you." I rose from the pew, my knees unsteady as if the weight of both prayer and longing had left me frail. "You should rest," I murmured, though the words felt hollow even as they left me. He shook his head, stepping closer until the candlelight flickered across the lines of his face. "Rest will not quiet this," he said. "The fire showed me how quickly everything can be lost. I cannot lose this too, whatever this is between us." His words cracked something open inside me, a truth I had long tried to smother beneath obedience. "And yet," I answered, my voice trembling, "what we feel, it threatens everything we have vowed." My hands gripped the back of the pew until the wood pressed sharply into my palms. "Is it love?" I asked. "Or only temptation dressed in holy light?" He closed the distance between us, his gaze unwavering. "If it is temptation, then why does it make me pray harder? Why does it drive me to serve more faithfully? Does sin give life? Or does love?" The questions tore through me. I wanted to believe his words, but I also feared them. I thought of Mother Cecilia, of the sisters who trusted me, of the children's innocent voices singing in the courtyard. Could I betray them for this trembling fire in my chest? Or was it betrayal already, to deny the truth God himself had kindled within me? My heart wrestled in silence, beating louder than any bell. He reached for my hands, gently prying them from the wood. His touch was warm despite the soot still staining his fingers. "Anna," he said softly, "we stand between two altars. One built by vows, the other built by love. Which one do we kneel before?" His question hung in the air, heavier than any scripture I had ever studied. I searched his eyes, hoping for an answer, but found only the same hunger and fear mirrored back at me. Before I could speak, the chapel door creaked again. I pulled my hands back, my breath catching in my throat. Mother Cecilia entered, her face unreadable, her steps measured. She did not speak at first, only walked slowly to the altar and lit a candle, her movements calm, deliberate. The flame caught, glowing steady against the morning dim. Then she turned, her gaze settling on both of us. "You are not children," she said quietly. "You know the cost of your choices. Love is not forbidden by God, but the vows you took are not easily broken. If you cross this line, there will be no return." Her words fell like stones into a still pool, rippling through the silence. I felt Father Michael's presence beside me, strong yet trembling, and I knew the moment had come when nothing could remain hidden. The chapel seemed to shrink around us, the flicker of candlelight pressing close, the shadows leaning in like witnesses. My mouth opened, ready to speak the truth at last. Whether confession or declaration I did not yet know. But before any words could leave me, Mother Cecilia stepped forward, her eyes fierce and sorrowful. "Then tell me, Anna," she demanded softly, "before God and before me, what is it you truly desire?" I told the truth because Mother Cecilia had asked for it, and because truth, once breathed, is harder to swallow back into silence. I said, I desire what I have tried to deny: his company, his counsel, his nearness. The words left me like a confession and a benediction all at once. Father Michael did not speak. He only looked at me with an anguish that mirrored my own. Mother Cecilia's face did not soften. Instead, it seemed to set in iron, as if the years had taught her how to hold sorrow without breaking. She listened to my admission as one might listen to a storm report, clinical, urgent, and impossible to ignore. You have named it, she said at last, and naming is the first step toward consequence. Her voice was neither cruel nor indulgent. She spoke then of duty and of the fragile trust placed in those who wore the habit and endured the vows. We are anchors for others, she said, especially the young ones who learn what faith looks like by watching us. How does one balance a private heart's ache against the lives that depend on steadiness? Who owns our love when we have pledged it to a greater good? Father Michael rose and paced by the altar, his hands clasped behind him, soot still dark along his sleeves where the fire had marked him. I have failed in clarity, he admitted, his voice small in the cavernous room. I did not mean for this to become so heavy. I thought my pastoral care could contain tenderness without spilling into wrong. He looked at me then, as if searching my face for permission or for absolution. Anna, he whispered, is there a life for us outside these walls? One that does not harm others? The question hung between us like smoke, visible, inevitable, and staining. I thought of the world beyond the garden gate, the noisy streets of San Francisco where fog rolled in off the bay and radios played songs of comfort and revolt. Could faith live there as it did here, or would it be a different thing altogether? If we left, would we be bent toward love or toward ruin? If we stayed, would we become monuments to a sacrifice no one asked of us? I had no answer ready, only the slow, certain knowledge that my life would change whether I chose or was chosen for change. Mother Cecilia spoke then of penance, not as punishment, but as a means to mend. She offered us paths that would keep the convent intact. Father Michael might accept reassignment. I could undertake a period of solitude and service under strict supervision. Or perhaps we would seek counsel from the bishop, who could weigh mercy against scandal. There are ways to protect the flock, she said. There are also ways to protect the guilty by hiding them in places that do not see the light. Her eyes bore into mine. Do you want to be protected, Anna? Or do you want to be free? Was freedom simply the absence of constraint? Or was it the presence of truth in its raw and difficult form? I understood in that moment how little control we have over the stories others tell about us. The convent had its own memory. It had legends and quiet histories that did not bend to the needs of two fragile hearts. If we stepped out, we risked becoming a scandal that would ripple like oil across the water, tainting even those we loved who had no part in our choices. Did I have the right to inflict such waves? Could love ever justify the breaking of so many small, trusting things? How do you weigh one soul's hunger against 100 others' faith? As the day wore on, the sisters filed in and out of their duties, unaware, or pretending to be, of the storm that had settled into the parlor. Children's laughter drifted from the schoolroom, bright and unworried, and I wanted to tuck that sound into my pocket and carry it with me as proof of what was at stake. I watched a young novice pass by the window, her face untroubled and earnest, and I felt a new kind of shame. Not the shame of secret desire itself, but the shame of knowing I could be the cause of confusion for someone so innocent. Could I forgive myself if her faith faltered because of me? When evening came, Mother Cecilia did not make us decide. Instead, she offered mercy in the form of time. "Pray," she said simply. "Ask what you must. Come to me when you have listened." There was relief in those words and a cruelty as well. The relief of postponement, the cruelty of prolonging a wound. I returned to my cell and sat with the rosary, feeling each bead as if it were an argument I needed to weigh. I asked God, again and again, not for answers as much as for courage to bear whatever truth came to light. Is courage the same as absolution, or merely the willingness to face a consequence without flinching? Night fell like a soft verdict. I slept fitfully. Dreams a tangle of bell tolls and childhood faces, of Mother Cecilia's lined hands and Father Michael's soot-streaked sleeves. When I woke before dawn, the convent was a skeleton of quiet, the lamps lit like watchful eyes. I walked to the chapel and knelt, not for ritual but for a kind of hearing. I whispered the names of those I loved and those I feared I might hurt. The air was thin with cold and holy expectation. When I rose, there was a note on the altar, folded and simple, written in Father Michael's careful hand. My hands trembled as I opened it. He had not spoken of leaving or staying. Instead, he had written of gratitude and of sorrow, of how the fire had revealed the brittle places in our lives, and of how my presence had become a light he could not stop following. He wrote that he would accept any consequence that preserved the convent, but that he could no longer pretend indifference to what had been kindled. His final line was the only one that mattered. "Meet me at the river at dusk, if you still believe we can find a life where neither of us must lie." The river. A place outside the city's hum, where waters moved and did not judge. I folded the note slowly, feeling the weight of a decision not yet made. Dusk would come with possibility or with an end. I dressed in my plain habit, each fold a ritual I knew by heart, and stepped out into a day that seemed to hold its breath. As I walked toward the river that afternoon, the convent bell tolled the Angelus, and somewhere in the distance a trolley clattered over tracks. People moved on errands, children played, life continued in a world that had no idea how close a heart could come to breaking. I kept my rosary tucked in my hand, fingers moving over beads like a metronome counting out the measure of my fate. At the riverbank, the gray water flowed steady and indifferent. Father Michael stood waiting beneath a willow, its branches trailing like a curtain between us and the city. He looked worn, older than he had that morning, as if the day's events had drawn him thin. He did not reach for me at first. Instead, he spoke in a voice made soft by the sound of water. "We have one last chance to choose not just for ourselves, but for all who will be touched by that choice." I swallowed hard. "Are we brave enough?" I asked, though I was not sure whether I meant brave enough to leave or brave enough to remain. And then, as if the river itself could not bear the tension any longer, someone called out from behind us, shouts urgent and panicked, pulling both of our heads toward the convent, in a direction we had not expected. The shouts carried across the water, urgent enough to pierce even the steady rush of the river. I turned, the rosary slipping from my fingers, beads scattering in the grass like small, startled birds. A young novice ran toward us, her veil flying loose, her voice breaking with fear. "Mother Cecilia, she has collapsed in the chapel." The words struck harder than any bell, echoing through the hollow of my chest. Father Michael and I exchanged a glance that needed no words. Whatever choice we thought we had been about to make, it was torn from us in an instant. We ran back through the winding streets, past the clatter of the trolley, past the eyes of strangers who could never know the weight of our flight. By the time we reached the convent, the chapel was filled with sisters kneeling, their faces pale with worry, their voices rising in unsteady prayer. Mother Cecilia lay upon the stone floor near the altar, her face ashen, her breath shallow. I dropped to my knees beside her, taking her hand into mine. The skin was cold, the bones fragile beneath the thin veil of flesh. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment they found mine. "Anna," she whispered, her voice faint but clear. "Do not let my years bind you. Choose what keeps your soul alive." Tears blurred the crucifix above the altar as I bent closer. "Mother, I don't know how," I confessed, my voice breaking. "If I stay, I betray my heart. If I go, I betray all I vowed." Her lips curved into the ghost of a smile. "The vow is not a prison. It is a path. But not every path is forever." She drew a breath, ragged and sharp, then let it go with a long sigh, her hand loosening in mine. The chapel was silent except for the murmur of prayer and the sound of my heart, heavy with loss. Father Michael stood at the edge of the circle, his face shadowed by grief. He had lost not only a superior, but a guardian who had shielded us both from greater ruin. In that moment, I realized something I had never seen before. Love does not erase suffering. It illuminates it, makes it bearable, gives it meaning. Whether I stayed or left, I would carry both the cost of my vows and the truth of my heart. There was no life without burden. The days that followed blurred into morning. The sisters walked as though the stones themselves grieved beneath our feet. We prayed for Mother Cecilia's soul. We sang hymns she had once chosen, and we lit candles that seemed to flicker less brightly without her watchful gaze. Father Michael spoke at her requiem with a voice both steady and trembling, praising her faith, her strength, her mercy. I saw tears glisten in the eyes of sisters who had never wept before. And yet, within me, the question still burned. At the river, we had been on the edge of a decision. Now, with her gone, it was mine alone to make. I walked the corridors in silence, pressing my hand against the cool stone walls, listening for an answer that would not come. Was God calling me to remain, to carry her legacy, to guide others as she had guided me? Or was he releasing me into another kind of service, one where love and faith could dwell together outside these cloistered walls? One evening, I returned to the chapel where she had fallen. The air smelled of wax and lilies, the candles glowing softly. I knelt in the same place, clutching my rosary, the beads still bruised from where they had scattered at the riverbank. I whispered aloud, not to saints or to angels, but to the God I had sought since I was a child. I am afraid, but I want to live in truth. Show me how. And in that silence, I understood something I had never dared admit. God had not trapped me in vows. He had invited me into them once, and he could invite me into something new again. The burden was not to remain chained, but to walk faithfully where love and conscience led. That was all he had ever asked. I rose from the stone floor, a strange calm settling into my chest. I looked at the crucifix one last time and felt no chains, only a path unfolding before me. When I stepped out into the courtyard, The evening sky was awash with violet and gold, the bells tolling softly as if to bless both memory and future. Father Michael waited there, his face lined with questions. I took his hand without hesitation. "I do not know where this road will lead," I told him. "But I cannot live in silence any longer. Whatever comes, I will carry both love and faith with me." His eyes closed briefly, as if in prayer, before he whispered, "Then let us walk together." And so we left the convent gates behind us, not as fugitives, not as rebels, but as souls still seeking the light. My life had been shaped by stone walls, by vows, and by silence, but it would not end there. Love had broken through, and though the path ahead was uncertain, it was alive. Now, as I look back across the decades, my hands withered by age and my voice thinned by time, I see the truth clearly. Love does not erase faith. It deepens it, reshapes it, makes it human. A heart can belong to God and still beat for another. And that is the secret I have carried all my years, the one that changed everything.